Hey everybody, welcome back to Addiction and the Three Principles. My name is Greg Suki. I'm here with Harry Durbisky, and today we've brought back Keith Blevens to continue talking about the single paradigm, which I found absolutely fascinating last time, and a lot of people responded really well to it. So we wanted to bring him back to get a little deeper into it, because it's kind of hard to cover in an hour. And with that, I'll hand it over to Harry.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Well, I wrote down a few notes, so let's see if I can read them. In the last show we had, I see this show as not a continuation of our last show. I really like Keith's approach. I learned a tremendous amount, which of course is the biggest compliment I can give him. And I kind of see Keith as kind of like a Zen master of the three principles. It's just my own image of it, but it sort of is applicable in his demeanor and also his clarity, his simplicity of being able to explain things like that. I'm more of a woo type of guy, and but Keith, you know, and what I noticed in the last class that I really liked was when Keith was talking about thought creates feeling. That was very clearly articulated. And so that brought the class a long way. And then also he had readings from his book, his new book that he's written with a lot of quotes, original quotes from Sid Banks. And that was also took the class into a much deeper thing. So with that in mind, Keith, I have a couple of questions related to the last class, if you and then you go wherever you want. What's his? I can't say who he is, but Arvin mentioned this, and you talked about at the end of the last class that you weren't releasing your book because you feel the rigor, RIGOR, is not at the level you would like to see, and until it is, you're going to hold your book back a little bit. And I'd like you to describe to me what you mean, or not to the class, what you mean by rigor. You know, it's a word that I must admit I have not heard in relationship to the three principles, and I would love to hear a little bit deeper explanation of that word. And the other thing that you talked about, this is a quote, more or less a quote: the principles are holistic, and as such, it spiritualizes everything. Entire universe is mind, thought, consciousness. You glimpse that, and it eliminates the splitting or parsing. Example, Sid emphasized not doing the three principles, but emphasis on the pre-existing, that word?
Nature.
Truth. Pre-existing truth.
Yeah.
So that comes from the last class, as a thing. And then I'd like you to just roll wherever you go. Of course, it's a free for all thing. Lots of group discussion. If people have questions on their mind, certainly ask Keith anything you feel is relevant, and away you go.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. A pleasure to share with you all. I felt that many years ago, a prominent three principles teacher said to me that Sidney Banks was the most rigorous speaker and thinker that he had ever heard in his entire career. And I thought to myself, because rigor means a specificity, a particularity, a black and whiteness about things that were being said, and I thought to myself, well, I'm not sure Sid is a black and white guy. He's a kind of a philosophical guy. He's a generalist. He seems like he's got a lot of things that are not specific and pinned down. But I really took to heart what he said, and as I went further along and studied Sid, and then many years later, you mentioned this book that I read a piece of, that was a book that was, just to be accurate, that was a book that Sid wrote, and then he knew he was dying, and he gave it to me, and we worked on it and translated it into a dialogue between him and me. But it was written by his hand. So as you all know, many of his publications were story forms, and this has that nature to it. Except in this case, it's Sid is the character, and I'm a real person. So so there's no Andy or Richard or Jonathan or other people, other characters. It's he and I, and so that led me to comprehend. There were many things that Sid knew, and I don't know anyone who would venture to say that they know what Sid knew. What happened to him was truly a miracle and an astonishing, world-changing event that I've never seen the likes of. So none of us are of his caliber, and I would challenge anyone who pretended to be, because they wouldn't really understand much about the depth and dimension of what he had to say. So so he was quite a story, just in his own right, that where he came from, what happened to him, how he came to know this knowledge, all without study, all without a prior exposure. It's quite an interesting blessing of an arrival of knowledge into a person's mind. That was phenomenal, but it was also earth-shattering and specific. There were a lot of things that those of us that got the chance to be with him and study with him, there were a lot of things that he brought that were shocking, disturbing. He knew things that that none of us. I was professionally trained psychologist, but one of the first things that that I heard him say was, quit looking at the past. And that was a really shocking advancement right there, because everything that I'd ever been trained or thought about in terms of helping people, we always started with childhood experiences, family history. That was the common denominator of every single approach. And he said, essentially said, what's that got to do with it? And that was, it set me up straight, and it made me have to think completely different than I had been taught to think. And I loved it. But it was also challenging. So there were time and time again that his come from, or what he was pointing to, was so unique and different that it was clearly revolutionary, and there was no other pattern in the field of psychology or in any other field that I had become aware of that was very similar. So he brought a unique perspective, and as I came to understand, I started looking at, right early on, the idea of a paradigm breakthrough was on the tip of our tongue. We talked about it in many different ways. Paradigm wasn't a word that Sid used, as far as I know. But toward the latter part of his life, I started using it more to talk about the breakthrough that he had had, and he welcomed that idea. He appreciated it. He once I explained to him more about what it meant, he could see that it was a break from anything non-paradigmatic. So when a paradigm shift happens in a field, it brings about revolutionary vantage points and a completely new baseline, a completely new bottom. And these principles satisfied that. And so they created a whole new way of looking at mental life, this, what I would call the science of mental life, that Sid Banks is literally the father of the science of mental life. He saw the nature of the science of mental life, and it had it does have a spiritual nature to it, a spiritual nature that is not it's holistic in that it goes beyond time, space, and matter. Time, space, and matter, beyond time, space, and matter, by the way, many of you may know, but that is the title of his autobiography, which is as yet unpublished too. But you could see that there was great things at work in his approach to life that was not just a simple psychological method or feel-good strategy or something like that. And those of us who had the chance to meet with him and talk with him, you clearly were blown away by the depth and the quality and the feeling of this speaker. So talking about it as a paradigm, I think honors the magnitude of what he brought. And because it's a bottom line paradigm, in that it's a spiritual paradigm, in that it's there'll never be another paradigm extension of it. Like there can be a final paradigm. For example, for many thousands and thousands of years, it was thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system, and the sun was a planet. You can see it revolving around us. It still looks that way today. And the Earth seems like it's standing stock still. It still seems like that today. So it was easy to see how those two illusions combined to make the Earth seem like the center of the solar system, and probably even the center of the universe. Well, and the Bible recorded that data in something like 17 places. Well, but there were problems with that model in that it didn't work to explain the way the solar system works. Like, for example, the simple one is the calendar. The calendar was completely it was completely impossible to predict the length of a year. And and that was a problem. Like, they couldn't adjust the calendar. They couldn't get the calendar adjusted to keep things clicking along with the seasons as brought about by the solar system. And the reason for that is we had an Earth-centered solar system that didn't exist. There never was an Earth-centered solar system. There never has been. There never will be. When the final solution to the solar system was nailed by Copernicus, it reordered everything, and it made we haven't had a problem with the calendar in 400 years. But until then, we chronically had a problem with the calendar because we had the wrong paradigm. Once the paradigm was identified, all the error was eliminated, and we'll never have another paradigm for the sun-centered solar system. That's the final paradigm. This is a final paradigm too. It's a God-given paradigm. It's a paradigm of no exceptions. It's a paradigm that Sid saw and articulated, and he says in my book, he says he saw this paradigm the day he had his enlightenment experience. He knew this was the final paradigm. And so and then he spent the rest of his life talking to people about it. So that became a kind of calling card. I didn't feel like the principles were getting the respect that they deserve in scientific circles or larger circles because of it had been it couldn't find its own identity as different. And I thought the paradigm was the perfect way to illuminate the final difference and create a distinction that would be really powerful for the future of the three principles as a paradigm. So I started talking to Sid about that, which he loved. And I think that had something to do, it had a lot to do with him selecting me to receive his last writings. And so he gave me those. So that said, there's a separation or a distinction or a unique advocacy position that that people in the chemical dependency field or in any other field wanting to study and understand these principles, they can start with a blank slate. They can start, and if they don't, if they bring in other training, other theories, it could make it even hard, really, to get the idea of a paradigm. A paradigm is a very different. A paradigm doesn't really reveal itself until you can contrast it with the former paradigm. When you can see the difference between the two, then you've really got something. If it's bleeding over and you're still caught in the past or still caught in trying to be happy or trying to have better feelings or whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to get watered down in in the distinction. So I would recommend people really take into account this paradigm claim. Now, what does it mean for the spiritualization question that Harry asked? That you see, it's really quite interesting because, and Sid spoke about this all the time, that there's really that it's a universe of the universes of principles. It's not just a psychological thing inside of people. He's saying that the universe is psychological. The mind of God is psychological. The mind of existence. So without the three principles, existence would have no. We would have no existence. We would have no psychological experience without the principles. And that's an interesting proposition, because it removes, it includes then the principles with existence. There's no separation possible. And I think we can learn to think that way about the principles and about existence. I know I have, and I know many thousands of other people that have, and it does something to help them. It takes a lot off your mind. If you suddenly have an answer, let's just say back to the sun-centered solar system versus the earth-centered solar system. In the earth-centered solar system, which never existed, It was complete fantasy, had no reality to it whatsoever. All these errors were multiplied. They couldn't, and getting those errors corrected was immensely helpful. It created the Renaissance in Western thought. So it was a huge thing just to get this one order, this pre-existing order, to get it nailed as to what it really was. And that really opened up so many things that were blocked and confused and hung up, and the implication that it was all it shattered all these other conceptions. So it had implications for physics, and it had implications for mathematics, and had implications for astronomy, and had implications for all these fields, and writing, and it had implications for spirituality and religion. The Bible had to be changed. There were all kinds of things that ensued from this one little seeming flip, that the sun was not, that we're not, the sun was not a planet, we are. But that was the proper order, and getting that sorted and as to how the solar system actually worked, freed up, and all these problems unraveled. See, they just naturally unraveled, and all these new possibilities came into play that were not theretofore possibilities. And that's just exactly the way what Sid Banks saw has affected our future. It's hardly done anything to date. It's been relatively small as to what has happened, but it's a small but ever increasing ripple effect, because it's the Sid has sometimes said, the cat's out of the bag on these principles, and it will continue to erode these former ignorances and set things straight, and set us straight with things, such that we'll be better and better able to comprehend and experience the spiritual nature of reality as it is. So it's going to have an enduring and far-reaching impact that will last for thousands of years, I predict. So a paradigm's a big deal, and I'm pleased to share it with you. There was again a holism. Like, one of the things that Sid said was, God outside is illusion. God within is reality. Now, and you can see that if you have a God outside, another thing he said was, there's nothing outside that can help you. There's nothing outside that can hurt you, because there is no outside. Now, if you can think about that, if you can hold that in your mind and consider it, that there is no outside, the withinness of within everything, within you, within me, within nature, within existence, God pre-exists, then there's some sort of answer that begins to dawn on you, and it takes a lot of things off your mind. It's just a lot of things that are like, oh, it's funny that you find one little simple fact like that, and it kind of unravels all these other separate problems that you didn't even know were based on an illusion. So it's like it unravels things at a deep level, sets you straight with the truth, and then you get to benefit from the welfare and benefit of that truth on an ongoing basis as you live your life. So, and the main impact of that, for, let's say, for those people that struggle with chemical dependency or psychological distress or illness or etc., is peace. Is there's a peace because the answers that you were before bedeviled by, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with them? Why don't people like me? Why did my mother do this? All these, et cetera, these thousands and thousands and thousands of problems all begin to unravel as being not really the question that you need to answer anymore. Those questions are not the questions you even want to ask anymore. It changes the questions. A paradigm changes the questions. And that, then that's how you know you're really tracking something of real significance, because you're getting value. You're realizing, and that's what they've always said. If you read any books about paradigm shifts and what have you, they'll say, we weren't even asking the right questions. We were asking the questions based on the old paradigm. But when we saw the new paradigm, those questions just flew out the window. They weren't even the right questions. We thought they were based on the old paradigm. But based on the new paradigm, there were new questions. And those questions were much more important, much more valuable, much more relevant, much more meaningful. And you really get somewhere. Where do you get to? You get to peace. You get a lot of things that we busy ourselves with in terms of our search and our issues and our problems, our the pain and the suffering that we do mentally, is all based on assumptions based on the old paradigm. The three principles paradigm changes all that. And so one of the things that we've prepared in our work with this writing that we've been doing is a series of things that we've called implications of the new paradigm. And a new paradigm, it's really interesting. A new paradigm, here's another thing that Sydney Banks was so insistent upon that we couldn't really get together why he would say this, but it had to do with doing. He was very clear that there was nothing to do. There was no technique, no method, no process, no procedure, no practice, which every single thing we'd ever run into in our field was peppered. It was completely filled with practices and processes and procedures. It's still true today. In fact, if you look and you see any method and you investigate it very far, you'll start to see things to do. If you see things to do, you're not looking at a three principles program. Because it doesn't, all it's required is to see how it works. And you have insight about how it works, and it will do it for you. It will take things off your mind. It will slow you down. It will reorder your issues and problems. It'll do it for you. So there was another thing that we realized what Sid brought was paradigmatic. So those new realizations started to bring me into a deeper and deeper peace, with less on my mind. So we have implications of these paradigm insights, and they're not applications, but they're just ways of describing the how something works, and how in contrast to how something doesn't work. And that we found to be a really effective description of what Sydney Banks brought. How the psychology of mental life actually works, how actual reality is being created, and how it doesn't work, how actual reality is not being created. If we get that sorted out as a human race, we'll be using the paradigm that actually exists to help us be more peaceful and more healthy. If we use the wrong paradigm, we're going to muck it up, as we have for thousands of years, and there's no hope in sight. So this is calling for a revolutionary assessment of the paradigm of mental life and how it actually works, in contrast to how it doesn't. I could read some of the implications just to give you a taste of that. I could read some more of the book, or I could answer questions. And I thought maybe I'd just stop and see what you guys or the crowd might think they would be most interested in.
Yeah, that was great, Keith. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Please feel free to either unmute yourself, or in the participants tab, you can hit the raise hand feature and we'll get you on.
Yeah, I have a question.
Hey, Gavin.
Hey, Chris. That sounds like Chris.
Chris, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hey Keith. Chris from Denmark. Well, what I just noticed, and it's really interesting for me, when I'm listening to you, it's as if you disappear. So it's not Keith Blevens, it's something else speaking. That was the experience I had right now. Are you there, Keith?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So for me, that's really like, so when you're talking about the paradigm, I just get this, I'm very thinking images. I just get this image of a pen setting a dot on a piece of paper. Like, this is it. This is the point. and since I participated in your course online a couple of months ago, I've had this experience that I start. I'm not even reading 3P books. I don't really feel like going to courses. Maybe yours, and it's just become so much more easy. But it's on a subconscious level, I guess, also, because I don't really think that I'm thinking about it. It's more like, so thank you for that. And that kind of clarity can almost be scary. because it's like a ray, X-ray of what reality is really about. And then I have this part of me that wants to put more color and data into it, but it's really rather simple. So you talked about God, and what you said, as I heard it right now, was that's the only one in the room.
Yeah. 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 That's everything. God is everything, you know. And I mean, we all know that, we've heard that said, but I think when you get an experience of, oh yeah, you know, it does something to defeat dualism, because that separation, and Sid talked a lot about separation, and he said you can think you're separate, but you're really not. So with the power of thought, we have the ability to think ourselves separate, but we're really not, because we're given the power of thought, and we can use that power. We can even think ourselves to not be thinkers and to not be in this thought universe. But ultimately, you know, you kind of give up on that. And I like what you're saying, because it's been a lot of the experience of a lot of people that have been taking courses with us, is that I think they just start to settle down, and they start to find peace of mind, and all this other search and figuring it out and looking at this and looking at that and the other thing, people just, it's like it slides off. These questions get answered, and you realize that I don't have to, maybe I could go for a walk, you know. And Sid would talk about this. He'd say, this, when you find the answer, the search is over. And you can, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I've been searching my whole life, you know. I don't know if I want the search to be over, like you're saying. Maybe I could add a little color in here or something, but that really is what you really are. We're all really looking for peace, you know, tranquility, a meditative state, enjoyment, appreciation, gratitude, all these things that he spoke so deeply about are now becoming possible, because we're not agitating our own system with another question or another issue or another thing to think about. And having these things fundamentally answered, paradigmatically answered, paradigmatically taken off your mind, like big categories of things that were before kind of, you know, you had this, you had that, and I didn't know about, you know, I didn't know how much of my mental life was still preoccupied with detail and issues and opinions and beliefs. When I saw this as a paradigm, it started doing to me what you're experiencing, and it really it satisfied me fundamentally within myself, and I found myself more peaceful. And I think that's what people are, I mean, I know that's what people are really looking for. All alcoholics, that's what they're looking for. All drug addicted people, anyone. I love my wife, and I share this story pretty commonly, but maybe you've heard me say it before, but she says that when she was growing up, if someone would have said to her, Valda, would you like to have a deeper experience of God? She would have said, oh, absolutely. I think that would be a wonderful thing. What have you got? Tell me. You know, and she said no one ever really asked her. And but she said, I found through the principles, and Sidney Banks says at one point, he says, that's why I keep talking about thought, because I know that's how I found it, is via thought. So via his own power of thought, he found peace and a closeness to God that was so powerful and so calming and so healing and so meaningful that it just transformed him. And it would do that for any of us, and is doing it for any of us. It has to, because it's what you've been looking for. No matter what, we have different situations, we have different conditions, we have different health statuses and finances, but that's the one thing that everybody is really, that's what they're really looking for. Now we know what it is, and we know how to talk about it, and we know how to point people towards it. That's a very important thing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Chris. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Right.
Oh, no, you go, Scott. You go.
No, I just have a comment. I would love to hear him read more with the book that he's writing with Sid. I would enjoy that if we have time.
Okay, sure. Sure, I'd love to, Scotty. I'd be happy to do that. We got a little bit into it last time, but it's just fascinating for me to read it, because I love reading it myself, and I know as other people get a hold of it and read it, I'm sure that it'll mean something to them too. So I'd be happy to do that. Should I do a few pages now? Is that okay?
Yeah, let's roll into it.
All right. Just so happens I have it right here.
Coincidence.
So last time, I think we started with, so he said it started out with, he said, in the fall of 1973, I had an enlightening experience and realized the existence of a world very few people know exists. From that moment on, I walked into a world that is invisible to the naked eye. So powerful was my experience, all the negative feelings and sadnesses that had plagued me for 42 years vanished like the mist in the morning sun. That was the day I realized all my sadness and negative feelings were all created from my own thinking. I had freed myself from all my past negative experiences. At that moment, I knew deep in my heart, if anyone could realize for a fact that we live in a world of thought, they too would find the happiness they were searching for. What I found that day was so simple, yet so powerful, it boggles the mind. Right there and then, I knew that this was the missing link and the answer psychology and psychiatry were searching for. This is the answer that could heal millions of people who were suffering needlessly. Where I lived on the little island of Salt Spring, let me just jump ahead now. He says, Keith, allow me to tell you a story that may help you better understand the profoundness of the three mystical principles. I started to explain how the principles I talk about allowed us to acknowledge the existence of creation. This trio together gives us the gift to think and observe life, each in our own special way, which is sometimes known as our freedom of thought. When we use them properly, we can create a heaven here on earth. When we use them wrongly, we can live in a world of hell, filled with sadness and negative feelings. Those who have been successful in finding the answer to this mystical puzzle are sometimes called the Enlightened Ones. Such people always had a profound message to give to the world. Ironically, they were often frowned upon because of the mystical ways in which they spoke. In the past few years, it has been my observation that most people who seek truth, quote, seek it here, they seek it there, yet the truth evades them everywhere. At first, the way they thought was very puzzling to me, and I wondered what was this enlightenment they spoke about, because he says that people would come to him and they would act like they knew what he was talking about. They acted like they were enlightened too, and he could tell that they had that attitude, and he thought, well, that's odd that you would have that attitude, because it's clear to me you're not enlightened. Why wouldn't you just listen and be honest? But people couldn't be honest. They wanted to compare and argue. And why didn't they know that the true knowledge they sought did not reside in any part of the body? Why would they think that? Like, that was puzzling to him. Why would they think it had to do with the body? Even more puzzling to me was, why had they come thousands of miles to find more knowledge if they were already self-realized? Like, he could see that they weren't. Why couldn't they just be honest and sit down and listen up? This is not so. So I would explain, as a matter of fact, everyone on earth is only one thought away from what they seek, if they can find this one magical thought. Time and time again, they would challenge me and ask what this one thought was. With a smile on my face, I would always answer, the one thought that you seek is the state of no thought. I remember one particular man accused me of talking nonsense, then proceeded to tell the group a story of how he was driving down the road and suddenly he experienced the state of no thought and almost drove off the road. I panicked, he said, because I couldn't think. He told me it was the worst experience he had ever had in his entire life. Oh, really? I said. And you say this all happened to you when you were in the state of no thought? It was the thought that I couldn't think, he said. So, you must have been thinking to create your panic, were you not? I asked him. The look on his face was priceless, as he realized he had not been talking about the state of no thought. He didn't say another word. One other person challenged me further and asked, how can the state of no thought be the missing link to self-realization? I would explain to them, when I say the state of no thought, I'm talking about no intellectual thought. I'm talking about no intellectual thought. I'm not talking, oh, excuse me, that's a typo. I'm talking about universal thought. And that enables you to enter into a world of formless spiritual energy. You're in the present moment. Here is where you return home from whence you came. I remember one time asking a man asking me if I meditated. This I can tell you, I said, a deeper state of meditation and a deeper state of consciousness are one and the same thing. The only difference is when you start to understand the true nature of the principles, you don't have to meditate. My advice is to beware of rituals or techniques. This I can tell you, because they will never work. At times when someone who'd been searching for truth heard what I had to say, they would leave and never return. How sad it was for me to see them walk away when they were so close to the very answers they were looking for. But just because of all the misconceptions and rituals and beliefs and ideas and techniques they carried in their heads, they walked away. So then I asked him, when you talk about everything being spiritual, formless energy, what exactly do you mean, Sid? And he said, such an answer is something you have to experience for yourself. Does this relate to what Dr. Einstein's theory of E equals mc squared? Not really, Sid replied. What Dr. Einstein's theory was talking about was the already formed energy of this world. What I'm talking about is the formless energy that lies before creation. He was talking about after creation, and I'm talking about the energy that lies before creation. Keith, you're asking me to tell you the greatest mystery in this world, and I will tell you again. I nor anyone else can possibly explain the answers you want intellectually. It is not until you go beyond their metaphors and have a revelation from your own wisdom that lies deep within your soul will you understand such a mystery. These three principles are the master keys to the mystery of all psychological functioning, and I doubt very much if there are many in your professions who have ever even heard of them. I asked Sid if he would explain in more detail exactly what these principles are. Divine mind is the intelligence of all things before creation and after creation. Divine consciousness gives us the ability to recognize the existence of creation and all it entails. Divine thought gives us the ability to walk through life as a thinking creature. So I said, he had reworked some of this, so I'm sorry for being a little, I have a draft here, so it's been edited by him. I told you before, what I say couldn't be intellectually explained. It has to be explained metaphorically in the hopes that you will go beyond my words and have a realization of your own wisdom. Sid, I asked him, do many people hear what you are trying to say to them? With a wry smile, he replied, no, not really, Keith. But as you have experienced for yourself, some have had just a glimmer, and it has changed their lives forever. The beauty of all this is that you don't have to understand much of what's being said. All you have to do is have a good feeling at what you're hearing, and the answers may be divulged to you later on. However, this I can guarantee you. If you're having a bad feeling as you listen to what is being said, you'll never get what you're looking for. How do we lose such knowledge? I asked Sid. The long-lost truth we seek is lost the moment we leave our mother's womb and enter into this divine illusion called this physical world. Allow me to explain in more detail. During the incubation period in our mother's womb, the good Lord gave us what is called a soul, and a soul is pure consciousness, and is the very essence of our being. At birth, we are granted the usage of these three divine gifts of mind, consciousness, and thought. On entering this physical world, we start using the three principles along with our free will. In doing so, we are using what is called our ego intellect and begin to experience this physical world as the only reality that exists. It is here we separate ourselves from the whole and allow our ego to guide us through life. Doing so, we live in an illusionary world of duality and begin to see the form and the formless as separate entities. It is here we lose touch with the God-given wisdom that lies within. This is why the wise have often told us to look in the singular to find our way back to the lost wisdom that lies within. Here you will see that the formless spiritual world and the world of form are the same thing in a different disguise. This is what the wise have sometimes called the great illusion. I will tell you again, Keith, these three are the Trinity to all experience here on earth. That's the end of that chapter.
That was fun.
Yeah, that's some pretty powerful stuff.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could feel the room filling up and filling up and filling up, and why sit at a little is a lot. Yeah.
He could say just a few minutes, and you feel like you've had a Thanksgiving dinner or something, and just be completely filled to the brim.
Well, we do actually have one more hand up. We have Arvin. Go ahead, you're unmuted.
Yes.
Hi.
I have a question regarding what do you mean by spiritual nature? Like when I hear the talk, usually it's explained spiritual nature of the principle. So what exactly the nature means?
Well, I think it means that the spiritual nature is not a it's form. It has a form and formless aspect to it. So something of that sort has a kind of a you can't capture it in words or concepts or beliefs. It has a it's bigger and not so it's not going to be limited by words. Like it's kind of wordless. So when I think of spiritual, I also think of wordless. And we all have spiritual experience. Like last weekend, I was I went to the Grand Canyon, and my goodness, it's just every time I see that vista, it's just so stunning. But I don't know what to say. I don't think many people go there and say a lot. I think they just go, whoa, just sort of, they're sort of in awe. So it has a nature to it of that. The nature of that nature is not a worded nature or a limited nature or an objectified nature. It's of a totality of grandeur and magnitude that you can't really, you don't even want to bother to try and put it into words. So the nature of nature is spiritual. And that's the quietude, you know, like when you settle down, you know, and you can think and you can have your things that you're doing and taking care of business, et cetera, but you always have time for, you want to have time for just having less on your mind. And I think that's really where the principles really help us. There's a lot of extraneous thinking, reactive thinking, kind of little judgmental thinking, patterns that we indulge in. And I didn't know that it kept us busy. You know, it keeps you thinking. And when Sid said no thought, I thought he means all that thought dies or temporarily goes away. You can kick it back up again.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get a break from it, there's a piece that is mental health, and you deserve that. Every person deserves that. Mm-hmm. And without that, people get they get to thinking about things and they get insecure and agitated and they get worried and fearful and doubtful, and they don't really realize that they're doing it through their own use of these principles. They're making hell for themselves. But it looks like the hell that they're making is not mental. It looks like it's physical. It has to do with, well, what's happening to my mother, or what's happening with my boss, what's happening with my job, etc. So we justify our busynesses, and we lose our mental health, and unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. And so if you study people and you watch people, you realize sometimes you have people who have a lot of mental health who don't have a lot of, let's say, a lot of physical comforts. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of mental health. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have people who have a lot of physical comforts who don't have a lot of mental health. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you realize it's really an important thing to realize how this mental health works for everybody, because everyone deserves, if they understood how that system worked, and the intelligence of it, and what it would take off their mind, it will take things off your mind. Mm-hmm. The principles guaranteed will take things off your mind. Does it make sense? Is that?
It's a bigger answer than I was. The question is, so it's spiritual, like spiritual nature. Is there the quality that you are referring to? Like it's formless and it's form. It's the same, or it's nothing that creates everything. It's like, because I'm not able to see what is the quality that's spiritual nature you are referring to. Like what is that?
I see.
Yeah.
Well, do you have what would come close to it in your mind? Like how would you, if you were going to make a guess about it, how would you now these are things that are challenging for people sometimes, but it's good for them to find a place to be able to hold it and reflect on it and articulate it, because they'll get more familiarity with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So do you, what do you have, like, would you call love a spiritual experience?
I would call love as an experience, but for me, what spiritual, in a sense, spiritual nature, it just means something that is nothing that can create something else.
Okay.
That's what spirituality for me. So pretty much you could explain it, if it is a logical way, it's a magic. So from nothing there is but you have something else.
Okay.
That's what but this way of explaining to somebody who's looking for answer is not quite a understandable, I suppose, for them.
It might not work for them, but that's what you, like Sid would often say. He would say, now if I'm saying something and you don't quite like a word that I'm saying, or you find it to be confusing, you put your own word in there. Okay. And I thought that was really ingenious for him to say that. Like I thought, he'd say you find your own word, like, because he didn't want the words to get in the way of you moving along and understanding something. If you get hung up on a word and you're kind of stuck on a word, you can, he would say, you want to move along, like don't get so word based. Now I was trained to be an intellectual thinker, so I was very inclined to intellectualize, and so but he helped me break that habit, and he helped me to see that there was many things that were not word based or not an object in my mind that were really important. There's a little poem that I memorized once that was written back in the 5th century BC, I think, that I want to say. So it was by an Indian saint or something. I can't even remember who it was. A perception, sudden as blinking, that subject and object are one, will lead to a deeply mysterious, wordless understanding. And by that understanding, you will awaken to the truth. A perception, sudden as blinking, that subject and object are one, will lead to a deeply mysterious, wordless understanding. And by that understanding, you will awaken to the truth. So maybe that's another way to explain it, or get a feeling for. One of the things that we do, one of the things that I heard Sid say that was really helpful for me was, it was what creates mental sickness and mental health in 2 sentences. So he said, mental sickness is created when you put feelings onto objects. In your mind, you think about your mother or your brother or your job, or we can put feelings onto objects in our mind, and we create a mental sickness because we create a separation between that thing, that object, and our feeling. And it looks like that feeling is coming from that object. But then he said, but if you can see If you can see if you can see the object without the feeling, you're healthy.
Yeah. Yes. It's kind of hard to separate though, but yes.
Yeah.
It makes, yeah, totally. Yes.
So we all make those little splits,
Mm-hmm.
put feelings onto something, don't even know we're doing it, and then we're going around suffering it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you can see, oh wait, I've just made a little mental illness onto myself here.
Mm-hmm.
An insight is when, another thing you said was an insight is when your ego collapses on a particular subject. So if you have an insight, it takes away the threat that what you're thinking about is determining your feeling. It can't. The way you're thinking about what you're thinking about is what creates your feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brings to mind something that I in the book I'm writing, I asked some authorization from Elsie, and I had described her experience as a thought creates a feeling. And she wrote back and says, that wasn't my insight. My insight was thought creates feeling. And a thought is something that you're doing with it to create a feeling. And I thought that was actually quite helpful for what you're talking about, is it's not a thought creates a feeling as I understood before that. It's just thought, the principle of thought.
Yeah.
The universal nature of thought creates feeling.
Yeah. 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 Well, hey, it's been, I don't know if I mentioned, well, if this is, I think we kind of covered it here today. I'm a little bit tired because I've had the flu for a week. And
Well,
I'm all of a sudden out of gas here, so I was thinking.
No, I was just thinking this is a perfect place to end it anyway, because that was beautiful.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks again, Keith. You have a really simple way of pointing toward this truth. Kind of helps clear the mud out of the water a bit.
Yeah. That's right. Simplicity is a good thing. It really is. That's one of the primary things that people. And I should mention our website. We have 3 Principles, paradigm.com website. But simplicity. Everybody comments. Most everybody comments on the simplicity of the site. It says it's very spare, but very simple, and I think that's a high compliment.
Yes, very much so. So thank you again. Thanks to Chris, Scott, and Arvin for joining in and asking the questions today. This was awesome. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so they can say thank you and goodbye and everything. So it's about to get noisy. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you all very much.